Good afternoon. You know, the last time I came here was in a different life and in a different time when I used to be on the board of the stock exchange. So it's such a pleasure being here this afternoon. And more than that, I'm extremely happy to be moderating a very, very eminent panel of the three of whom you know already. What I'm going to do is, we are going to have some questions here on the theme, which is impact assessment. You see, when we talk about impact assessment in the context of CSR, there is often that question mark that pops up in the mind that CSR involves a host of stakeholders' interests from which a corporate tries to remain equidistant. It talks about human rights, it talks about environment, it talks about communities, it talks about labor, and so on. So when we talk about impact assessment, the question that may pop up in our mind is, which impact assessment are we talking about? The fact is, by and large, the frameworks apparently remain similar, no matter which area one is working on. But in the context of the seminar as a whole, we are going to, probably give a slightly greater focus to the communities' work which are typically done in the context of women empowerment and related areas. So I think it's in this context that I'm going to throw some questions around with the real experts. I think I'll start with Professor Epstein here, who has done an enormous amount of work in this field, and this book is about social impact, as you can see. So, Mark, tell me, what are the broad frameworks which are available as a tool for people who are working in the field of CSR in various areas to make some assessment of what the impact has been? Can you give some leads?
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here today. I think Dasra was kind enough to invite both my colleague, Professor Udis, and I here, based in part on this book that they've all just mentioned, that's being launched today in India, and related to this new work that we've done related to the Companies Act, along with, I guess, the work that I've done over my career, which is mostly around corporate social responsibility and social impacts, and measuring performance. And I think what the Companies Act has done is it's provided a wonderful opportunity for companies to rethink what they're doing in corporate social responsibility and sustainability. It's an amazing opportunity to rethink and develop a coherent strategy about what it is they're trying to do. And measurement is critical to that. To me, one of the things that's really changed is when we think about measurement, and measurement is a component of CSR, it shouldn't be about the inputs. If we think about a logic model, it shouldn't be just about the inputs or the check writing or how much we spent. And it shouldn't even be about the outputs, which is how many things we did or how many people or how many schools. It needs to be about impacts. Is the world a better place? Are we making improvements? And that has not been measured as much as it should in corporations. It hasn't been done enough in NGOs or in foundations. So there are models. There's corporate models. There have been corporate attempts. It's certainly harder than measuring profits in a for-profit organization, but we can measure these things. And as we talk about women's empowerment, one of the critical variables is defining what it is we mean by women's empowerment.
Right.
And so I've done a lot of work on measuring a lot of things that often people say this is too hard to measure. They're not too hard to measure if you're really clear about what it is you're trying to do. How would you know success if you saw it? In corporations, we say it's net profit. It's how much money we made. In social enterprises, whether they be corporate or NGOs or foundations, I think it has to be, what are we trying to do? And so I've done work on measuring spirituality. You can do that once you define for me what you mean by spirituality. We can do that in empowerment once we're really clear about what we mean by empowerment, what activities we're going to engage in that we think will help us achieve empowerment. Then developing the measures is less difficult.
So would you say, Mark, that it's more important to know what the impact has been than on who has brought about that impact? I ask that question because typically any community is impacted by several players in the same region. The government is working on some scheme, some other NGOs may be working, a corporate CSR is also working in the same area. So what I hear, but correct me if I'm wrong, that what is important is if our end objective was, let us say, the women ought to be empowered more, and as long as we have a measure to ensure that they have been empowered, that is good enough, or do I try to see whether I am getting the bang for the buck that I'm spending on?
So I think, to me, that's part of what is your objective, what are you trying to do, and how important is this discussion of attribution or contribution to your analysis of your success. Some projects, some programs are more difficult inherently to measure than others. Some are more complicated than others. But in many cases, we can still set up some sort of a control group. I'm not talking about anything too expensive or too complicated, but somehow be able to isolate what difference you're making and what difference is being made in women's empowerment or anything else. So I think this can be done, but again, I think it has to be you have to be very careful about defining what it is you're trying to do.
Correct.
And then this logic model which says, are my activities likely to lead to that success? Too often, what I've seen are people that say they want better education, and then they haven't defined what they mean by better education.
Right.
And then they've started some activities that may or may not lead to better education.
My God, Mark, you've really made it sound so logical. You know, I always used to think it was a little more fuzzy than that, but I think you've really given it a shape. Let me come to Zarina. Zarina runs this foundation of her own, Swadesh Foundation. And she does a very integrated work with the community. And in fact, when I was talking to her, she was talking about working in concentric circles so that both the geographic and the activity focus is never lost. So, Zarina, you tell me, in the context of impact assessment that you're talking about, especially when you talk about a holistic impacting,
Yes.
what are the frameworks that you are using and how do you feel that reassurance year after year that, yes, I'm getting there?
Okay. So I think it's exactly what Mark said. It is you have to be extremely clear what it is you're doing, why are you doing it, when do you think you will be... So, for example, in Swadesh, let me be clear because Professor said it so beautifully. So our goal is, basically we said, what is it that we want to do? We want to empower rural India. Why do we want to empower rural India? Because we genuinely believe that India as a country cannot realize its true potential without 70% of our people being lifted out of poverty permanently. So we need to lift our people out of poverty permanently. And we have defined, we have KPIs and KRAs for every human being in our organization. That is, it is their regular, it's part of their regular impact assessment. The impact assessment has to go not only for your community, but also for your people. The very same goals that you determine, very clearly it's written down in black and white. I mean, I can read some of them out to you, just for example. What, for example, Priya, our head of education, would have in her KRAs are pretty much what we want the community to achieve. And they're written down, and we measure that year in and year out. We measure it, some things we measure on a continuous basis, some things are too expensive to measure all the time. So we thought we'll measure it once a year, and if it's too expensive, we'll measure it every 2 years. That's fine, so long as you measure it. In Swadesh specifically, we have many problems in measurement, simply because we are an integrated, holistic model of development. We start with the community, we engage with them, we empower them, we build multiple institutions within the community, and my favorite one is about community health workers, which is all related to women's empowerment, but I won't get into that. Then we execute multiple programs in the very same geography. At this point, we execute 70 programs with 30 different partners, one of which I think is in the room today. Tina might be here. And then we have this other goal, which is exit. So we're extremely clear what we as an organization want to do. I think exit actually defines our goals. So what do we mean by exit? And we have written down three things that we want, just three things. First of all, we want our people to be lifted above a certain level, and we've defined it. Every X years, we want their net family income to go up by X. Then we want, for example, now if we want that, even our education team is working on that. Our agriculture team is obviously working on that. Our livelihood team is obviously working on that. Even our social work team is working on that. How can they help? They are creating self-help groups, and they are empowering women to earn their own living as micro-entrepreneurs. And we have thousands of them on the field if you came to visit. So every single input is coming towards livelihood. Everyone is working collectively. Health. Take health and livelihood. You'd say, no, that's not related. But of course it is. So a person who's ill cannot earn. It's as simple as that. Okay? And that's not the only reason. But everything is creating this phenomenal, everybody working together in the same geography for one output. The other output is we want socially aware citizens of change. That is, we want empowered individuals. And there is where I'm going to ask Mark, please help me, because it is very difficult to measure empowerment. You can see it anecdotally, so don't mistake me. We can see it. We know intuitively, if any of you come with me, you'll know a woman who's been empowered from a woman who's not empowered. But I would like Mark to help me to, how do I measure empowerment? How exactly do I measure it? Is it a smile? Is it the fact that she's earning? Is it the fact that she's part of a self-help group? What is it? What are those immeasurable things that we can use to measure empowerment? I mean, you can see it anecdotally, thousands upon thousands of women, but we need to measure it. And the third is an environmentally conscious society. We have realized, to our utter dismay, that when a beautiful, all the villages in India may be poor, and I'm not ashamed of the fact that we're poor, but I am ashamed of what happens when actually become less poor, because our beautiful, clean villages become very dirty towns. And it is a shame. So I am going to try and see that as villages will go into their natural evolution into a small town, if we can create socially conscious individuals, and we're trying to work with kids, women, to do a simple thing like banning the plastic bag. Now I've oversimplified our triumvirate, if you like, because don't forget we have 4 verticals all working together to do various things. But I think, as Mark said, if you can just decide how do you feel that, yes, I can exit. I can exit and my people can create choices from themselves and act on those choices. And they don't start killing their girl children once they become rich. And they don't start dumping garbage bags into heaps like we have in our cities. So things like that will help you to measure what it is you want to do if you're very clear about it.
Thank you, Zarina. I think she has very beautifully brought out both the challenges as well as the attempts that she's making to measure it, and yet it's a little slippery. She tries to hold it, but she can feel it. I think she's brought it out in a very, very live manner. So before, she asked a very specific question to Mark, but Mark, before I come to you with that question, I will want Mr. Ashok Desai, who runs another major but flying below the radar foundation, Srinivasan Foundation of the TVS Group. He's been doing some amazing work for the last 11 years. Ashok, why don't you tell us something along the similar lines, the kinds of, what do you see as measurement, impact measurement in the work that you are doing, or do you take it as an act of faith? So if you could give us some examples of how you're doing it, I think it will educate all of us.
I think it's already been answered in a very lucid way by the two, Mark and Zarina. Let me add why do we take up CSR? Is it to satisfy ourselves or to satisfy, to bring about a transformation in the community? If it is transformation in the community, we can guide them. And what is it that we want? Do we want them to have financial security? Do we want them to have educational, high quality education? Do we want them to have better health care and better health for themselves, better environment? So if that clarity is there, then your measurement becomes much easier. For example, we work in about 2,600 villages today with about 1.6 million people, but we are very clear that when it comes to financial empowerment, each family should earn at least 15,000 rupees a month.
Wow.
Now, that is what we are aiming at, and today I'm happy about 72% of the families do earn that money.
Oh, fantastic.
Now, that's not because we want it, but because the people have been empowered to think and to try out new methods. Similarly, if we talk of education, what do we want by when we say quality education? Does it mean only results? Yes, that was what we were doing about 5 years ago. And we don't have a school of our own. These are all government schools, about 650 schools or so. What should be the result in a school? That was our first, that means your measurement keeps changing from year to year. That time, 5 years ago, we said pass percentage should not be less than 90% in a government school, which normally is not so. Today, we are happy to say that almost all schools range with anything between 85 to 100%. And I have got about 100 high schools, government high schools that we're working. But then we revised our measurement. Okay, fine, they're passing, but what is happening to them after they study? Are they getting good jobs? What is the purpose of education? Then you measure that. And then you go further. Are they becoming better citizens? Just no point finding a good job and earning a good amount of money. But are they becoming useful citizens for the country? Are they sensitive to the community's requirements? That means your measurement levels keep changing. I could talk about other things also, but what I'm saying is that you have to keep on revising your measurement parameters. Secondly, you have to keep very detailed records. Otherwise, all becomes anecdotal. We have got records for every school, every family, and I know it is simple, but it is deceptive. It means a lot of hard work, and that comes through trust. If the community doesn't trust you, you will not get any results, or you will get results only as long as you keep pouring money on them. As Anina said, we have to plan for withdrawal also. So impact assessment is also that, okay, when we reach that level, is the community empowered enough to carry on the change themselves? If they do it, then I think our impact assessment of CSR becomes meaningful. Otherwise, talking of incidents or activities and showing that as a result, as Professor Mark said earlier, that is only an activity, it is not the result. It is just an outcome perhaps, but the impact is a long-term result. And that comes out only when you are confident that you can withdraw from these villages. We have, for example, withdrawn from about 350 villages now. In another 2 months' time, we will be ripe to withdraw from another 150. How do we know that they are ripe for withdrawal? Now, that's again a parameter. That's an impact that we check. How many social leaders have come up? How much of responsibility is the community able to take rather than we doing it for them? And finally, it is all a matter of partnership, trust and partnership. If they trust you, they will partner with you. About 15% of our total expenditure comes from the community. The communities insist that no, we will, trying to improve a school or improving some infrastructure. Okay, we will contribute so much money. We know that they're not capable of putting the entire amount of money. So, but they contribute the money, and that's when we find the social leaders are there who will take the responsibility, and that's what we do.
Yeah, you wanted to say something.
I was just, exactly the community contribution. I was just struck by one thing that there are immense similarities between my past life, in this lifetime, of course,
Like my past life.
which is is in media and this one. Because in media, it just struck me when you were speaking actually. And in media, if you take, we had a company called UTV, and we launched lots of successful shows, lots of successful channels, lots of successful movies. Now, how do you make a hit movie or a hit show? It's only when you know, respect, and love your target audience, if you like, your viewers in the case of movies, that you can actually make a hit. In fact, we could even predict a trend, right? So we have these beautiful measurement systems, right? It's absolutely identical over here. So it's only when you know, respect, and love your community that you can actually help them. And you're not helping them, I think. It's a partnership. And we have the same, I think we have the same exact way of working. It's quite clear to me that we have. And these measurement methodologies, my point is that they're universally used in the media industry. So these universal methodologies is what's required here. And I mean, if someone like you, Mark, could take this up, or working with, say, Dasra and Deval, what we need in philanthropy, in CSR, basically we all want to do good. So basically, the outcome, the goal is the same for everybody. If we can work out certain basic methodologies of testing, of measuring impact, and all agree on that. Maybe all of us won't agree. Even in media, all of us don't agree on the TRPs, and half of them, we all squabble about it like crazy. And I'm not suggesting it's as simplistic as that. Certainly it will be more complex. But perhaps it will not be as complex as we think it is if great minds think together and argue and come up with a methodology that we can all use as the base of measurement.
No, as a matter of fact, what Ashok did is actually bring that down to earth. He makes a very simple statement. If you're talking about empowerment of people, their earning is the best measure. So what percentage of people are earning 15,000 or what percentage are earning 10,000 is a kind of a measure. So his goals are actually giving him the impact assessment even as he marches along. The same thing about education. So I think this is one way of simplified way of looking at impact assessment. But let me come back to the question that Zarina had asked you earlier, which I said I'll come back to you, which in some ways relates to what are the challenges, what are the difficulties that typically anybody working in the field of social sector or in social enterprises or in CSR, when they want to do this kind of measurement, you see, the result may be great, but a class 10 kid is not able to read a book of class 7, for example. So the pass percentage exists, but the literacy hasn't gone up. So there are all these contradictions. So what are the challenges that you come across in a spray bullet kind of a format, if you could just share it with us?
So let me, I want to address that. I want to also just comment on Zarina's last comment about anecdotes, because it hit home to me. I've worked with much of my career, and with Professor Udis, we worked on developing this book. And as we went around, so we visited 60 organizations that are described here. We talked with another 100 organizations that we looked at materials. And what we find commonly is just what you referred to. It's a lot of anecdotal evidence. And increasingly what we're finding is both the corporates and the foundations are demanding better information, better data than just anecdotes.
Exactly.
And people are putting on their websites a story about a little girl and what her story is. But people are saying, but how about all the other thousands? And so what we've tried to do is do exactly what you've asked, and that's what this book is intended to do, is to provide something past anecdotes.
Yeah.
So what we describe are 4 different approaches to measurement: trained judgment, trained expert judgment, qualitative research, quantitative analysis, and then monetization. And it's not that one's better than the other. What one needs to do is figure out what's most appropriate for the challenge at hand. And so for some settings, quantification, and there are some organizations that are trying to monetize this, put this into monetary terms. Some are using complicated randomized control trials and other approaches. But for many, you can do simple segregation or separation of a control group and treatment group. You could just do trained judgment.
Yeah.
But you need to get beyond anecdotes.
Absolutely.
And that's really what we've tried to do. And I think that's what is happening in all of these sectors.
Yeah.
The foundations increasingly are being set up by people that have extensive business experience and are wanting to use those same business approaches to solve their social sector issues. And so these can be done, and I think, as you were saying, I mean, I think it's just a matter of applying
No,
them.
I think absolutely right. I think, for example, what we do in media and what we've done here as well is we have our quantitative, which is a massive study, every year. So it's a quantitative study that goes into 2,000 people annually and measures them across 100 data points. And then we have done a very interesting study, which I really am looking forward to listening to the results of. We've done an aspirational study. So what are the aspirations of the people, of our community?
Right.
And we've done that also with a very large base for the first time of 1,000 people, which is ridiculous for a qualitative study. And I'm just waiting for the results, okay? And then we have mappings on the ground on a continuous basis through our community workers who are trained to get data, and then we crunch data with that.
So if you're in your media world,
Yeah.
or if you know how to approach thinking about measuring aspirations,
Yes. And brand.
why can't you take some of that
That's
same
exactly
approach
it.
and say, what I want to, the way I'm defining women's empowerment in part is about their ability to make choices.
Yes, that's right.
So if that's, why can't I use some of those same approaches that I would use in media to women's empowerment?
That is what we need to do, yeah. It is a very similar business. It is incredible because you're dealing with people and their minds.
And that's what I've seen over and over again as we make this clearer about. So you've defined women's empowerment, and I'm simplifying, as making choices, as an example.
The ability to make choices.
Once you the ability, as you do that, it seems like what you do is you make the impact assessment challenge much easier.
Okay.
Well, I think for a very nebulous subject, I think you've both given it a very good shape with some very empirical kind of inputs from Ashok. Ashok, just one last question, slightly different from this, that I would like to ask you before I take the house to the audience. As they say, you'll be surprised how much can be done if you don't care about who gets the credit. And you work with that philosophy effectively. So have you, at least in your assessment, have you been able to see what is the extent of impact that you are making alongside the government, that you work with the government schemes and so on? Because very often we never work in isolation. We work with others. And what is the best experience that you have found which you can share with them, which is the best way to work with government?
Thank you. In my experience, not because I have been a bureaucrat, because I retired long ago and I have lost all influence with the bureaucracy. Now, working with the government, as I see it, there is no corporate, at least in India, which can match the resources, financial and manpower, that of the government. Why can't we try and utilize those schemes of the government which aim for the very same purpose? Adolescent girls, for example. It's a huge program. They spend thousands and thousands of crores trying to help adolescent girls or expecting mothers or children in the preschool, Anganwadis, whatever. Is it important? Is it not helpful if we try and provide the last mile connectivity? There's always something which is missing which the government is unable to do. Just provide that little bit and your results will be fantastic. I can cite a very small story. I mean, I just take about a minute.
Do that.
In one particular state, the government spent a lot of money putting a bore well, putting a pump, electrical pump, and an overhead tank to provide water to the safe drinking water to the school. But they did not provide the pipeline. So now, how does the school get the water? The one easier way, obvious way, would have been to go and complain to the government. You look here, you're not given the pipeline. We didn't do that. For a 30,000 rupee investment, I provided the pipeline, the SST provided the pipeline, and it is functioning well. The government takes the credit, doesn't matter.
Correct.
Our objective was a good functioning school. Our objective was not to promote our brand or our name. So otherwise I would have had to spend a few lakhs of rupees to do all this. So for 30,000 rupees we could do that. Similarly, there are any number of incidents that I can report. The result is the school attendance has improved. The girls come to all the schools. In our villages, there's not a single child who stays out of school till high school. Not because we are wonderful, because the community accepts that these are good schools. The government takes credit for it, doesn't matter. But the larger objective of transforming the society is served, and that's what we are looking at.
Thank you, Ashok. Thanks a lot. I think you have heard the three of them, and I think you've got a fair idea of what are the broader issues concerning impact assessment. I would just like to add one small dimension to it, because to the extent there may be corporates who are just starting some activities with communities, for instance, what happens is initially you do not have enough database even to start an impact assessment, because you are barely 2-year-old, you are barely 3-year-old, you are only covering a very small population and so on. And to that extent, I believe there is always a stage where CSR or any community work is an act of faith. We don't always measure which billboard gives us how much revenue. Marketing is an act of faith. We don't always say which R&D effort has given us how much revenue. Some will fail, some will succeed. So, it's an act of faith. To some extent, I think there is an element of act of faith in CSR-related communities work in the initial stages. But I think thereafter, unless the impact assessment kicks in, we really won't know, are we really going anywhere, are we even getting there at all, and so on. So I think that's where the framework really has to be extremely important, so that especially in a resource-crunched country, it's all the more important that every rupee that we spend actually goes where it is intended to go. I think that's broadly what the session was about, and I wanted to ensure that we keep 20 or 25 minutes for all of you. Please ask your questions. You can indicate whom the question is directed to, or I will direct it to them.
Chair, can I just make one quick
Yeah, please.
comment to your
By all
to your
means.
last point? So I think one of the things that is important when we're starting a CSR program, though, I agree, but is to figure out the baseline.
Yeah.
So we may not be able to do much assessment on day one, but we can establish a baseline so that next year we can start doing assessments, or the year after.
Agreed.
And I think we haven't done
Agreed.
that.
No, so that is, completely and absolutely essential that if you're starting in an area and you haven't done your baseline, you will forever lose that opportunity. So it is essential that before you start, you do a baseline with a reputed third-party person, and there are many of them. Otherwise, you will forever lose that opportunity. So it is the most critical thing that you will do is your baseline. And please get a third-party person, really well-trained to do it. Don't think of saving money on your baseline. You will forever regret it.
Right. Yes.
I have a question for the professor. If you talk about social development systems...
Speak a little louder, please.
Is it better? If you talk about social development systems, and that's where the entire sustainability programs and initiatives are driven to, you can measure outcomes. But because they are so complex in nature, if you talk about education as one of them, there are so many extraneous factors which are very critical to have an impact on what you're doing. So how do you differentiate or discriminate those effects of those extraneous factors if you are running a program towards a particular goal?
So I was having some echo
What
here,
he's
I think.
saying is, in something like an education,
Yeah.
which has many variables impacting it,
Yes.
how do you isolate the effect of extraneous variables? That's what, if I understand it right.
So, yeah, thank you. Education is something that, as a matter of fact, Professor Udis and I have done a lot of work on. We've done work with primary school education in developing countries. We did a big study looking at Pratham here in India, BRAC in Bangladesh, Escuela Nueva in South America. We've looked at adults, illiterate and illiterate adults. And you're absolutely right, there are many variables. But I think what you still can do is set up some sort of a control group, that is, set up look at isolating some sort of paired sample, looking at something where you're setting up a control group and a treatment group, and trying to monitor what it is that your intervention is and how that intervention is changing. But again, what I found most in education that disturbs me with a lot of organizations is where I started, about this lack of clarity about what they're trying to do. So from an educational perspective, one of the things that we have looked at and written about is our organizations that work in Africa, for example, where in many countries half the children drop out of school after about grade 5 or grade 8, and they go back into subsistence farming. And so the question is, why are you doing this education? What are you trying to achieve? Is it better math scores? Is it employability? And once you define that, I'm going to teach very different things if you choose higher math scores or employability.
Correct.
And so I think you have to be really clear. Once you do that, I certainly understand the question you're asking, because it's a common question that there's a lot of variables that come in. So what you end up having to do is to have a treatment group. And you don't have to do a randomized control trial of a massive scale and very high cost.
Absolutely.
But you still ought to set the baseline and then have some sort of a control group.
Absolutely. So what we've done is, after much debate and argument, because it's expensive, so we did our baseline in our area, which is 6 blocks in Raigad currently, and we also did 1 block outside our intervention area at the baseline level. So, and it's expensive, but believe me, it's worth it.
May I also add? This, I mean, as we believe this integrated development, you cannot look at education in isolation. Why do children drop out of school and start working with their parents? Is it financial needs? Is it poor health? Is it lack of interest of the parents in the school? I could show you many parents who don't know in which class their child is studying. So we have to break up these problems and attack each of them independently. And that can be done only when you have the trust of the community.
Yes.
Sorry.
Let's take more questions. Yeah. Yeah. The mic, please. After this, we'll go to the back.
Thank you. Thank you all for your thoughts and for sharing all your work and impact and assessment. I have 3 questions.
No, only one at a time.
One at a time.
Yeah, one at a time.
Okay. My name is Rajiv Khanna. I'm from the International Development Exchange. I'm the Learning and Evaluation Manager. And oftentimes, we get caught up in evaluation metrics, and we think about evaluation as an end in itself. So how can we close the loop and really use evaluation as a learning tool to inform our program and organizational priorities?
I can start. So when we think about measurement, we ought to think first about why we want to measure. And so again, I think this is critical. Is it for accountability? I don't really care what the answers are, but somebody's asking me for this information, so I'll do it. Secondly, is it for learning? I want to learn because I want to do better. Right. Or action, I want to change my behavior depending on what I learn here. Right. So I think it's first critical, and what we found, and we've talked to the largest foundations in the world, we've talked to Gates and Hewlett, and we've talked to the smallest and high net worth individuals and NGOs, and what we've commonly found is, again, people that were sometimes measuring, they didn't want to be measuring, but somebody told them they had to. we had foundations that were requiring their NGOs to provide data that wasn't any value to the NGO. And what we also found, and a quick anecdote, we're with one large foundation which has a large monitoring and evaluation department, and I'm talking to the head of that department, and he says, you know, so we're on the second floor here of our building. External relations is on the third floor of our building. We don't talk to each other. He said, what do you mean you don't talk to each other? He says, the external relations people want to present a story, and they really don't care what the data is. And so they don't talk to us. The point is, I think an organization ought to be really clear about why they're doing this. And too often they're not. And I think it's also incumbent on the corporation or the foundation, if they're asking an NGO to produce data, they ought to be really careful about that data is useful for the organization for learning and action. And I think too often we don't do that. So I think we ought to be really clear about why we want to do this thing.
Yes, anyone at the back? I thought I saw a hand. Yeah.
The question is for Professor Mark. Here. I don't know if you can see.
Yes, there she is. Straight.
Yeah, Professor Mark, I just wanted to check if there is any existing scale to measure corporate social performance. Like we have scales for consumer behavior, we have scales from, environment, performance measurement. Is there any existing scale so that some universal measure is available for corporates rather than everybody struggling to find their own measures?
Like something like in Global Compact, if you
Yes.
become a member,
Yes.
you graduate to the higher level over a period of time.
Yes.
It's not overnight.
Yes.
So she's saying, is there a scale available for performance on the CSR index, so to speak?
I'm not sure I have tried to develop such an index in the past, and I do have, in addition to this, I have another book called Making Sustainability Work, which is all about implementing sustainability in corporate social responsibility. But I guess for me what this new book does is it addresses the issue of what are we trying to achieve. And I think if you're trying to achieve social impact, if that's the goal of a corporate social responsibility function or of a NGO or of a foundation, then that ought to be what you're measuring. If, on the other hand, what you're measuring is the corporate benefit, which some companies do, and we talk about something called shared value, or then you might be measuring corporate profits, increase in revenue, decrease in costs. Another thing that is in this book that Christy and I have worked on is really focusing on the capabilities, and it's in the supplement that's available for no cost on the website, as Deval said. What we have been promoting is that in addition to any corporate benefits, which we ought to be thinking about, and any societal benefits, which I think we must think about, there are substantial opportunities to enhance the capabilities inside the organization and inside the NGO and to the beneficiaries that will be beneficial to all of them in the future. And so, yes, there are all of these, there's Global Reporting Initiative and there's Global Compact and all of these things, but I think if it's around social impact, I don't think there's one measure that I think, one index.
Just to add another dimension, for instance, I'm on the board of a European company which is into ethical investing. So they look at various parameters. CSR is one, values may be another, and so the Vatican will not invest in a certain kind of companies. an Islamic country will not invest in a certain other kind of companies. So there are organizations which actually do CSR ranking also. But there again, the CSR standards may vary depending on which benchmark is being used, which country you are doing it, and so forth. But there are some measures available. If you look at this, I think there are some CSR indexes which are under development currently.
The problem is that sometimes what we do is we measure, we rate things based on, for example, the dollars of CSR spending.
Right.
I don't want to measure the input.
Exactly.
That's not what this is about.
Exactly.
This is, are we creating
No,
more
they
social
don't do
impact?
that. CSR index
Yeah.
is actually very highly developed. ECPI, you can just check out on the Google, ECPI. Yes, more questions? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Nitin Parab. Looking at the conversations that are going on since morning, I have a question. If there are two visions, one vision led by the leader of the corporate and one vision led by the person leading an NGO, would there be a clash of vision that would have a direct impact on the activities that go on further? Will vision have a clash between two individuals?
To answer this. Ashok.
I have not encountered that sort of situation because when a corporate is engaging an NGO, I'm sure there's a dialogue before that. And if a proper, frank discussion takes place, well, I suppose there will be convergence in their thoughts and there will be less problems. And in my case, yes, I've had some examples where certainly we engaged with some NGOs who had a totally different perspective of what they should be done. The simple answer was, okay, thank you very much, we'll find our own way. So that conflict doesn't stop you from working. Certainly that NGO must have found somebody else. We have found our own way.
Thank you. I'll take one last question, please. Yes?
Can I?
That's the last question. We can have one more? All right.
Hi. The question is from Mark. Do you find that in the quest to achieve external impact, which is largely financial and material, we often ignore the importance of internal impact or the inner transformation, where the softer aspects of love, empathy, kindness, are considered, without which the external impact may actually, be not effective or sometimes even harmful. Just to give you a background, I am, a part of one of the 500,000 volunteers of an organization called Service Space, which has just one full-time member, has never raised funds, but in the last 15 years, in terms of external impact, has delivered millions of worth of technology services to non-profits for free. But the larger impact is actually the love, the kindness that is generated in the way we do things. Now, how do you measure impact for that kind of an organization?
He's talking essentially about law of unintended consequences. While you are doing the external impact assessment, there are certain internal changes among the employees of an organization that happens, greater sense of giving, greater empathy, and so forth. So he says, do we also factor that into the impact?
So the approach that I take when I talk about social impact is I want to broadly define social impact. So I want to understand the impact on various stakeholders. And I've done this with large organizations that have opened new facilities or gone into do offshore oil drilling or a variety of kinds of operations. And I think what you want to do is try to brainstorm about what all of the impacts might be, both positive and negative, both primary and secondary. And sometimes there are unintended consequences, both positive and negative, where you create jobs for some poor, which happens with one of the organizations that we worked with. But by creating jobs for those, you are taking away jobs from others or hurting other organizations.
Correct.
And how do you think about that balance?
Very nice.
Likewise, inside the organization, there are all kinds of benefits. And I guess, for me, I think you have to think about all of them. Now, I'm not suggesting you measure all of them. I'm suggesting that when you're developing your plan, you think about these and then decide what to measure. For some organizations, we talk in the book about an organization called Kaboom, which builds playgrounds. It's supported heavily by a large retail company in the United States called Home Depot. And what Home Depot reports is the tremendous benefit they get in building stronger employee engagement and the teams. And that may be the biggest benefit to this organization in that CSR activity, is what it does for their employees in building strong teams. So I think there are positive and negatives. I think you need to look at those and brainstorm about what those might be whenever you're doing a project.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to add a small anecdote to what Mark has said. This is a story which was told to me by a gentleman from your group, Mr. Suresh Krishna, who's the chairman of Sundaram Fasteners, and he was the former CII president and Light of Asia and so on, a very eminent man. And he says this story was told to him by his father, T.S. Krishna, in 1962, when he was setting up Sundaram Fasteners. The story goes like this. In 1945, in Madras, Chennai, which was just a post-Second World War economy, diesel engines were in short supply because they'd all been sucked away during the war. And usually this diesel engine used to cost rupees 1100, and they used to put up a 30% markup and sell it for 1400 in the market. But because of this short supply, the open market prices went up to 5,000 rupees. So any trader in Chennai who had an import license for 1100 rupees could sell it for 5,000 rupees in the market. Apparently, T.S. Krishna, who was the chairman of TVS Motors, sent out a circular that, look, these are difficult times for our people. We used to make reasonable profit at 1,500 rupees for the 1,100 rupee engine, and exploiting a difficult market should not be our policy. We will continue to sell it at 1,500 rupees. CSR was an unknown term in 1945. Shareholder maximization was an unknown term which others were doing by selling it at 5,000 rupees. But here was a decent man intuitively doing the decent thing. And he asked his son in 1962, of all those people who sold for 5,000 rupees, do you remember anyone who is still a going concern? But the name of TVS, even today, if there is a product which has a TVS mark on it, everybody buys it blindly. In a most difficult market in the 90s, when nobody was subscribing to primary market offers, TVS offer was the only one which was taken up. It's a company which is respected to this day. Now, I would say that when you look at CSR and the values, it's a long-term value building in a company. We had 3 years ago a cloudburst in Ladakh where some of the airlines had put the price up 3 times because of the stranded tourists over there. So you can't do a collection at the end of the flight saying this is for some community, and then you rob Peter to pay Paul, because you're actually robbing your customers to do some do-gooding elsewhere. So I think that I just wanted to add that story to what you said. Yes, one more question. Yes. No, that lady there, she put her hand up earlier. Yeah.
Myself Shobha Shah from Sharda Mela Vikas Society, Gujarat. Actually, in health, we have indicators like we can decrease the maternal mortality or infant mortality. So, are there any indicators formed for example, the Jarina was asking to Mark for the women empowerment. Are there some indicators where we can compare internationally, like what is empowerment, women empowerment? So, this is the question. And
No.
I did quite forget.
Did you say what are the indicators of women's empowerment?
yeah.
Right.
Wow.
I think you are the right person.
No, so I think it's a complicated question. It depends what, again, going back, how do you define it? So how do we define poverty? I mean, the first thing I did when I decided to join Swadesh full time is I asked my team, what is poverty? And everyone went, what do you mean, what is poverty? And I'm going, okay, so what is education? What is health? And these are really the questions to ask. So the way we have defined poverty is the inability of a human being to choose his own future. That's it.
Wonderful.
And I'll give you a story, madam, which will tell you what is empowerment. Empowerment is simply the ability to choose your own future and act on it. The future you choose for your children, you should be able to give it to them. If you cannot give them what you want to give them, that's poverty. And I'll tell you what happened to me, and I could cry at the drop of a hat, but this really just killed me. I was not in the village. I cry in the village a lot because things are there. And then sometimes it's happy crying because wonderful things happen in the village. We were actually in the city. We had decided to meet people who had migrated from our villages to Bombay. So I was meeting men from the age of 27 to approximately 45, working men, okay? We had 250 men in the room. These were first generation as well as second generation migrants. Now we know how our migrants live. We go and we see how they live, you know, and I can't even describe. They actually sleep in shifts because there's not enough place for all of them to sleep at one time. So I asked them, I just asked them one question. I got up and met them for the first time. By the way, in our meetings, madam, when we go to the villages, when we used to go 10 years ago, only men used to attend the meetings. And you say, boss, if you're going to come without your wife, please don't come. So slowly now our meetings have women and men. But since this was the first in Bombay, there were only men, 250. So I asked them a simple question. I said, close your eyes, and you can use this as a technique. Everyone closes their eyes and asks one question. I said, if you had a choice, would you prefer to live in the city or go back to the village? If you would prefer to live in the city, put up your hands. And how many hands do you think went up? Not one. Not one.
Right.
And for me, that's poverty. And that is a lack of empowerment. And that's how you measure it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think for a post-lunch session, it's been quite a lively one. I must thank Mark, Zarina, and Ashok over here. Thank you so much, and thank you, Dasra, for this wonderful afternoon. All the best.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.